We had such an awesome assembly this morning. And then I was blessed to have a friend over. We had lunch together. We ate unleavened bread. And we got to talk about the assembly and some of the things that were shared. And I took note of some of the scriptures that were shared, and I want to share them with you. So I'll probably share them in a few different videos, because there was just so much meat, such meaningful dialogue and testimony in that meeting today. And I really want all of you to experience it. If you missed out on participating in these Passover assemblies this time, I will do another one for those of you who are interested, who want to enter into the second Passover. If you did not make yourself ready to enter into the first, we can do that. And I will do, I'll facilitate these assemblies, but you got to let me know that you want it. You got to do the work to let me know, and I'll show up if you show up. And I know some people who showed up to the first assemblies that I believe will show up to the second just to be there for you. But here's the thing. You're not going to be saved through what we're doing. You got to show up in your covenant, and part of your covenant is showing up for others, not just saying, oh, I don't really want to go. That's an inconvenience to me, or I don't have anything to contribute. No, you show up. You make sure. You can't be part of this temple if you won't even step foot in it. That was such an amazing assembly to close up and reflect on Passover and what God did in each of us during this Passover, how each of us grew to share our testimonies and to testify to what he's doing, that it is important that we're observing these holy days and that wisdom is bestowed through obedience. Jesus said, if you do the things that I'm telling you, you're going to know that I'm from God. You can't always understand what God is saying until you actually obey. The first scripture that was read today came from the CEV version of the Bible, and it's in Luke 22, so I'm going to read that to you. The festival of thin bread, also called Passover, was near. The chief priests and the teachers of the law of Moses were looking for a way to get rid of Jesus because they were afraid of what the people might do. Then Satan entered the heart of Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12 apostles. Judas went to talk with the chief priests and the officers of the temple police about how he could help them arrest Jesus. They were very pleased and offered to pay Judas some money. He agreed and started looking for a good chance to betray Jesus when the crowds were not around. The day had come for the festival of thin bread, and it was time to kill the Passover lambs. So Jesus said to Peter and John, "Go and prepare the Passover meal for us to eat." But they asked, "Where do you want us to prepare it?" Jesus told them, "As you go into the city, you will meet a man carrying a jar of water. Follow him into the house and say to the owner, 'Our teacher wants to know where we can eat the Passover meal with his disciples.' The owner will take you upstairs and show you a large room ready for you to use. Prepare the meal there." Peter and John left. They found everything just as Jesus had told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. When the time came for Jesus and the apostles to eat, he said to them, "I have very much wanted to eat this Passover meal with you just before I suffer. I tell you, I will not eat another Passover meal until it is finally eaten in God's kingdom." Let me ask you something. If this is going to be eaten in God's kingdom, then are we remembering something that has happened and also looking forward to something else that's going to happen? And if that's the case, should we be observing? Do you think that God's heart, what you know of God's heart in the Word, that we should be observing this in order to appreciate and understand what we're looking forward to? The fulfillment of the Passover. I tell you, I will not eat another Passover meal until it is finally eaten in God's kingdom. Jesus took a cup of wine in his hands and gave thanks to God. Then he told the apostles, "Take this wine and share it with each other. I tell you that I will not drink any more wine until God's kingdom comes." Jesus took some bread in his hands and gave thanks for it. He broke the bread and handed it to his apostles. Then he said, "This is my body, which is given for you. Eat this as a way of remembering me." After the meal, he took another cup of wine in his hands. Then he said, "This is my blood. It is poured out for you, and with it, God makes his new agreement. The one who will betray me is here with me at the table. The Son of Man will die in a way that has been decided for him, but it will be terrible for the one who betrays him." Then the apostles started arguing about who would ever do such a thing. The apostles got into an argument about which one of them was the greatest, so Jesus told them, "Foreign kings order their people around, and powerful rulers call themselves everyone's friends. But don't be like them. The most important one of you should be like the least important, and your leader should be like a servant. Who do people think is the greatest? A person who is served or one who serves? Isn't it the one who is served? But I have been with you as a servant. You have stayed with me in all my troubles, so I will give you the right to rule as kings, just as my Father has given me the right to rule as a king. You will eat and drink with me in my kingdom, and you will each sit on a throne to judge the 12 tribes of Israel. Jesus said, Simon, listen to me. Satan has demanded the right to test each one of you as a farmer does when he separates wheat from the husks. But Simon, I have prayed that your faith will be strong, and when you have come back to me, help others. Help the others. Peter said, Lord, I am ready to go with you to jail and even to die with you. Jesus replied, Peter, I tell you that before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will say 3 times that you don't know me. Jesus asked his disciples, when I sent you out without a money bag or a traveling bag or sandals, did you need anything? No, they answered. Jesus told them, but now, if you have a money bag, take it with you. Also, take a traveling bag. And if you don't have a sword, sell some of your clothes and buy one. Do this because the scriptures say he was considered a criminal. This was written about me, and it will soon come true. The disciples said, Lord, here are 2 swords. Enough of that, Jesus replied. Jesus went out to the Mount of Olives, as he often did, and his disciples went with him. When they got there, he told them, pray that you won't be tested. Jesus walked on a little way before he knelt down and prayed, Father, if you will, please don't make me suffer by drinking from this cup, but do what you want and not what I want. Then an angel from heaven came to help him. Jesus was in great pain and prayed so sincerely that his sweat fell to the ground like drops of blood. Jesus got up from praying and went over to his disciples. They were asleep and worn out from being so sad. He said to them, why are you asleep? Wake up and pray that you won't be tested. While Jesus was still speaking, a crowd came up. It was led by Judas, one of the apostles, the 12 apostles. He went over to Jesus and greeted him with a kiss. Jesus asked Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? When Jesus' disciples saw what was about to happen, they asked, Lord, should we attack them with a sword? One of the disciples even struck the high priest's servant with his sword and cut off the servant's right ear. Enough of that, Jesus said. Then he touched the servant's ear and healed it. Jesus spoke to the chief priests, the temple police, and the leaders who had come to arrest him. He said, why do you come out with swords and clubs and treat me like a criminal? I was with you every day in the temple and you didn't arrest me. But this is your time and darkness is in control. I want to pause right there because I want to remind you that this is going to happen to you too. Are you violent people? Am I a violent person? Am I speaking this message with violence? And yet the very people who claim to be doing a service to God are the ones who are going to persecute and kill you, even those whom you have known. And this is the attitude that you need to have. I was with you every day in the temple and you didn't arrest me. But this is your time and darkness is in control. You have to understand that when the Antichrist rises, that this is their time and darkness is in control. You go to like a lamb to slaughter. You don't fight. You don't bring your swords. This is not that kind of battle. And this is not that kind of kingdom. Remember what Jesus said. If my kingdom were of this world, then they would come and fight with swords and weapons. But my kingdom is not of this world. You follow his example and you go like a lamb to slaughter. Jesus was arrested and led away to the house of the high priest while Peter followed at a distance. Some people built a fire in the middle of the courtyard and were sitting around it. Peter sat there with them, and a servant girl saw him. Then after she had looked at him carefully, she said, this man was with Jesus. Peter said, woman, I don't even know that man. A little later, someone else saw Peter and said, you are one of them. No, I'm not, Peter replied. About an hour later, another man insisted, this man must have been with Jesus. They both come from Galilee. Peter replied, I don't know what you're talking about. Right then, while Peter was speaking, a rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked at Peter, and Peter remembered that the Lord had said, before a rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will say 3 times that you don't know me. Then Peter went out and cried bitterly. The men who were guarding Jesus made fun of him and beat him. They put a blindfold on him and said, tell us who struck you. They kept insulting Jesus in many other ways. At daybreak, the nation's leader, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law of Moses got together and brought Jesus before their council. They said, tell us, are you the Messiah? Jesus replied, if I said so, you wouldn't believe me. And if I asked you a question, you wouldn't answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of God all-powerful. Then they asked, are you the Son of God? Jesus answered, you say I am. They replied, why do we need more witnesses? He said it himself. Oh, this is so funny. I just called my friend because there was something that I was looking for in this passage that it actually is not in Luke 22. It's in Luke 12:22. But that's okay. That was a fantastic passage. It was perfect. And we're talking about Passover. So it was perfect. God worked that out. Let's take a look at Luke 12, verse 22. Jesus said to his disciples, I tell you not to worry about your life. Don't worry about having something to eat or wear. Life is more than food or clothing. Look at the crows. They don't plant or harvest, and they don't have storehouses or barns, but God takes care of them. You are much more important than any birds. Can worry make you live longer? If you don't have power over small things, why worry about everything else? Look how the wild flowers grow. They don't work hard to make their clothes. But I tell you, Solomon with all his wealth wasn't as well clothed as one of these flowers. God gives such beauty to everything that grows in the fields, even though it is here today and thrown into a fire tomorrow. Won't he do even more for you? You have such little faith. Don't keep worrying about having something to eat or drink. Only people who don't know God are always worrying about such things. Your Father knows what you need, but put God's work first, and these things will be yours as well. It's that statement right there, verse 30. Only people who don't know God are always worrying about such things. Think back to before you knew him. And maybe you're coming to know him now, but the only thing that we need is to know him. That's it. That's all we need in this life is to know him. If we know him, if we're being led by him and moved by him, then we can endure. But it's only those people who don't know God who are always worrying about everything. There's never enough. There's never enough strategizing. There's never enough knowledge, always learning, never coming to understanding. But we're not to be like them. The assumption is that we know our God, that we believe in our God. One of the things that I was talking with my friend about at lunch had to do with all of the things that God was proving to the Israelites during that first Passover. And before the first Passover, leading up to the Passover, he would harden Pharaoh, and then he'd soften Pharaoh, and then he'd harden Pharaoh and soften Pharaoh, and harden Pharaoh and soften Pharaoh. And then he'd send a plague, and then he'd relent. And then he'd send the plague, and then he'd relent. And he would relent based on the prayer of Moses and the softening of Pharaoh. Because Pharaoh said, okay, I'm going to let your people go. And then, so go pray to your God. And then God would relent. And he was making a name for himself, even leading up to Passover. And so Passover finally was this time where he had already demonstrated through Pharaoh. He had raised Pharaoh for this very purpose. He gave Pharaoh so many more opportunities to correct himself than Pharaoh even deserved. And he raised Pharaoh for this very purpose, as an object of his wrath, in order to display his glory to the objects of his mercy in the Israelites. Passover, the story of Passover, is really a small scale example to help us to understand what we're doing. What are we doing here? It's an example to us of the covenant. It's an example to us of what we're living through right now. The bondage, the oppression that we're experiencing, the name that God made for himself. He proved himself to be God. He proved that he is sovereign. And then he told the people, this is what I expect. They obeyed, they were delivered, proving himself again. They're wandering, now their enemies are coming again. I mean, did God need to go through this so many times? And yet he did. He went through it so many times, proving to them time and time again who he is. So by the time that the people made that golden calf, God had already done these things with the plagues. He had already spared them and passed over them, delivered them from bondage, even turning the hearts of their enemies to where they were able to plunder them before leaving Egypt, feeding them manna from heaven, testing them in the wilderness, giving them water from a rock, snuffing out their enemies like a wick, parting the sea, closing up the sea on their enemies. And now Moses is on the hill, and he's receiving the 10 Commandments, and they're making a calf. Do you understand why God was so angry and so many of them died that day? Is he not righteous in doing that? Is he not righteous in that anger and in destroying them? We're not supposed to be living as people who don't know their God. If we claim to know him, then we have to live as those who know their God, not being afraid, not bowing down to idols and false gods and thinking that anybody, I don't care who it is, has more power than God. We're supposed to live as people who know their God. And God says, I made a name for myself. You saw what I did. You saw how I carried you on eagle's wings. You saw what I did to your enemies. Now, here's what I require of you. Counterfeit Christianity has a terrible habit, a deceptive, disgusting habit of separating Jews from Christians. Do you understand that if you're a Christian, you're a Jew? Jews are not a race or an ethnicity to God. Jews are those who are circumcised in heart. They're those who are separated as a holy nation to Him. That's what a Jew is. There's no separation of what God has commanded Jews and what He has commanded Christians. It's continuity. It's a continuum, a fulfillment. Only reason you're called Christians now is because Christ came. So that name is on you as a Christian. If you're actually in Him, that's what it means to be called a Christian, is that His name is on you. We're not talking about counterfeit Christianity. We're talking about those who are truly identified as belonging in Him. Did something change in God's heart in the interim? Was the promise of God when He established the law and told the Israelites how they were to do sacrifice, participate in these sacrifices or offer these sacrifices? Did He say, was the promise stated as, I'm going to send you a sacrifice, I'm going to send you a Messiah, and He's going to save you, and then I won't require anything of you anymore? God has always required of us. He has always required us to participate in that covenant. And He has told us that it's going to be difficult to be saved. That if it's difficult for the righteous to be saved, what will become of the ungodly and the wicked? There is a greater burden on Christians today than there ever was on our Jewish ancestors. A greater burden for us to fulfill and live in that covenant than there ever was. And you know why? Because God sent His Son. And therefore, He expects us to live according to the example and the teachings that His Son brought. There's no excuse for us. And so to think that the burden is less on us is completely without understanding. God says that in the past He overlooked such ignorance, but now He expects everyone everywhere to repent. There's absolutely no way that we can possibly be justified if we're not living in that faith, because it's commanded. And I said living in that faith. I didn't say that you're just convincing yourself that you're holding something in your heart, because if you ain't living it, if the works are not coming out of you, your faith is dead. You go to work on His Sabbaths and His holy days, and you think, oh, no big deal, God knows my heart. You don't show up for the body of Christ. No big deal, God knows my heart. You have to be being moved into obedience to what God has established, even when and if you think, I don't know how He's going to make this happen, but I know this is what He has required of me, and so I'm going to do it. And I know that my God is going to make a way for me to obey what He has commanded. Do you believe that? Do you believe that He's a sovereign God, or do you believe that He's a sovereign God but? Because my Bible doesn't say but. My Bible says that He is sovereign over everything. And so if that's the case, then He is going to make a way for me to obey every single thing that He has commanded of me. Do you believe that? Because I believe that. I know that to be true. I know that He is faithful and that He is sovereign and that He will make a way. I know that He has proven Himself in my life, in the life of my children, in the life of my friends. I'm watching Him do it in many of your lives. And I know that when He proves Himself, that He also tells us what He requires of us. You saw how I carried you on eagle's wings. Now here's what I require. I will reward you for obedience, but I will punish you for disobedience. If you do not live in my laws and statutes, those plagues, those diseases that you saw me put on the Egyptians, I will put them on you too. But if you obey me, I will not put on you any of the diseases that I put on the Egyptians, because I am the Lord who heals you, and I am the Lord who sends disease. I am the Lord who heals disease. I will send you shepherds, and you will hear a voice behind you saying, this is the way, walk in it. Many of you are saying that. You're testifying, this is the way, walk in it. Don't worry. that the things that God says for you to do are in opposition to the world. He already warned you that they would be. Don't worry that the world has some sort of truth. God is the only source of truth. Only people who don't know God are worrying about such things. But you are to live as one who knows your God. You are to live as one who knows who God is. Thank you for listening. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.